He
He was
thought it
just
would be
smiling
a
at the crowd,
once-in-a-lifetime
and in the next
experience,
second there was
just
blood
a
all
few
over the
minutes in a
stage.
cage with a black leopard. A selfie, a memory. But in under 10 seconds, the animal tore his scalp off. This didn't happen in Africa. This happened in a Florida backyard, just steps from someone's grill and patio furniture. If you're into true stories that sound too insane to be real, this is one for the books. And if you believe the wild should stay wild, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more real-life tales that are stranger than fiction. This is Animal Story, and today we're talking about what really happened to Dwight Turner and how one man's search for spiritual connection led him into the jaws of a predator, literally. August 31st, 2020. The Florida heat hadn't broken yet. The kind that sticks to your skin and makes the air feel heavy before noon. On the surface, it was just another quiet morning in Davie, Florida, a small suburb nestled outside Fort Lauderdale. Middle-class homes, palm trees, pickup trucks in driveways. Nothing out of the ordinary. But behind one of those fences was something no neighbor ever expected. Dwight Turner, 50, had driven down from Miami that morning. He was soft-spoken, deeply spiritual, and had a lifelong love for animals. Friends said he believed in energy-healing nature, the unseen bonds between humans and animals. So, when he found a chance to get up close and personal with a rare black leopard, he took it as a sign. Something transformative. Something pure. All it would cost him was $150. The man offering this experience was Michael Pogge. No one in the neighborhood really knew him, but his property was rumored to be home to a bunch of exotic animals. There were no signs, no business hours, no ticket booth. This wasn't a zoo. It was a backyard, with cages, a chain-link fence, and a PayPal account. Online Puggy called it a sanctuary. But there were no conservation goals, no trained staff, no medical professionals, no safety briefings, just a promise. Come meet the leopard. Pet it. Sit inside the cage. Take your photo. Create a memory. No waiver to sign. No protective gear. Just a gate that opened with a key. It's unclear how Dwight found out about the place. Some say it was a Facebook group. Others say a friend gave him the contact. But however he heard about it, he showed up that morning full of anticipation. Not fear. This wasn't some daredevil stunt for thrills. For Dwight, this was spiritual. A moment to connect with something ancient, raw, and powerful. What he didn't know, what no one warned him about, was that the leopard had been kept in captivity for years, that it was caged in a space no bigger than a walk-in closet, that it had no enrichment, no escape from noise, and no idea how to interpret a stranger entering its space. What Dwight saw was a sleek, beautiful animal with black fur and piercing yellow eyes. But what the leopard saw, an intruder. Pogge unlocked the outer gate and nodded Dwight in. No instructions, no handler nearby. Just a man, a cage, and a predator. Dwight crouched near the center, probably smiling. Maybe reaching out. Maybe trying to find that moment of connection. Maybe even praying. But the leopard didn't wait. There was no growl, no warning. Just raw, feral speed. And within seconds, the story took a violent, irreversible turn. Trigger warning. The following content describes a graphic animal attack and may be disturbing to some listeners. Viewer discretion is advised. You know that moment right before everything goes wrong. That eerie calm, where your body knows something's off, but your brain hasn't caught up yet. That's where Dwight Turner was kneeling in a leopard's cage waiting for a photo to be taken. He thought he was about to have a spiritual moment. Instead, he was walking into a nightmare. There was no trainer nearby, no tranquilizer gun, no medical staff standing by. Just Michael Pogge standing outside the cage like a guy watching someone mow his lawn. and behind the man, a caged predator, silently stalking the back of its enclosure. The air was thick, Florida thick, the kind of quiet that presses down on your skin. And then it snapped. The attack. The leopard didn't growl, didn't lunge with fanfare. It moved like liquid shadow, fast, silent, and with deadly precision. 1 second, Dwight was crouching for a picture. The next, the animal's jaws were wrapped around his head. Its teeth punctured his scalp like paper-cracking bone with a sickening crunch. Then came the claws slashing down his neck, raking deep, ripping flesh from muscle. Blood sprayed the cage walls like something out of a horror movie. Dwight screamed, and then screamed again. But this wasn't a scream you'd hear at a haunted house. This was pure primal panic, the sound of a man being torn apart. The leopard clamped down harder, dragging Dwight to the floor. It tore open his scalp so violently that flaps of skin hung from his skull like ribbons swinging as he struggled. His right ear nearly severed, dangling by a strip of tissue. Blood pooled fast under him. His hands flailed, trying to push the beast off, but it wasn't a fair fight. It never was. Michael Pogge froze. For a full few seconds, he just watched, either paralyzed or indifferent, no one knows for sure. Eventually, he moved, yelled, maybe banged on the cage. Somehow, miraculously, he got the leopard to back off. But the damage was already done. Dwight lay there in the dirt, bleeding out, half-conscious, barely breathing. His face slick with sweat, and blood, his skin pale as chalk. He tried to move. Couldn't. His body was going into shock. There was no emergency plan, no first aid kit. No 911 call made the second the attack began. It took minutes for Pogge to finally pick up the phone. Minutes that, in a trauma situation like this, mean everything. The aftermath begins. By the time paramedics arrived at Pogge's backyard zoo, yes, zoo, because that's what it really was, Dwight was clinging to life. He was rushed to Broward Health Medical Center, one of the few trauma centers equipped to deal with this level of damage. Surgeons performed emergency operations to reattach his scalp using 22 surgical staples. His ear was partially reconstructed. Skin grafts were required to cover exposed tissue. But the damage went beyond the surface. Parts of Dwight's face and scalp were left permanently numb due to nerve damage. He couldn't feel his right temple anymore, couldn't fully smile, could barely look in the mirror without recoiling. Emotionally, it was worse. What he took into that cage and what he left behind. Dwight had entered that cage believing in peace connection, something sacred. He left it torn open physically and spiritually. Friends who visited him in the hospital say he hardly spoke, that he wouldn't let anyone touch him, that the sound of a dog barking would send him into full-body tremors. He was no longer the man who had walked into that enclosure. He was now the face of a growing, horrifying truth. You can't tame the wild. And you sure as hell can't sell access to it for $150. After the ambulance pulled away and Dwight Turner was wheeled into emergency surgery, you'd think the story might start winding down. But it didn't. In fact, this was the part where everything cracked wide open. Because as horrific as the attack was, the bigger question was, how did this even happen in the first place? How does a man get into a cage with a full-grown black leopard in the middle of a Florida suburb with 0 permits, 0 safety procedures, and walk out permanently disfigured? And the answer to that starts with Michael Pogge, unmasking the sanctuary. To the untrained eye, Pogge's property looked like your average Florida backyard palm trees, a modest house, maybe a few sheds or outbuildings. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed illegal zoo. But behind the privacy fence, it was a whole different world. Investigators from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, FWC, began digging into Pogge's background the day after the attack. And what they found was chilling. Michael Pogge wasn't a trained wildlife handler. He wasn't a zoologist. He had no veterinary credentials. What he was was a backyard animal dealer, a man with a long history of buying, breeding, and selling exotic wildlife, often skirting laws, ignoring permits, and putting profit over safety. Neighbors had long suspected something strange. They'd heard noises, growls, shrieks, even the occasional roar. But nobody really knew what was going on behind the fence. It wasn't until Dwight's scalp was nearly ripped off that the truth spilled out. The pattern of recklessness. Turns out this wasn't Poggy's first rodeo. Records showed that the FWC had flagged Poggy before for housing wild animals in residential zones, for failing to provide proper enclosures, and for keeping unpermitted species. But none of the complaints had led to serious consequences. He always found a way to slip through the cracks. He kept moving animals, kept changing addresses, kept rebranding his operation under vague terms like sanctuary rescue or education center. But make no mistake, this was a business. And Dwight Turner, he wasn't the first person allowed inside a cage. He was just the first one the world heard about. No license, no oversight, no excuse. Under Florida law, close contact with Class 1 wildlife, which includes big cats, like leopards, tigers, and lions, is strictly regulated. You can't just open a cage and let someone walk in because they Venmo'd you $150. You need a public contact license. You need safety barriers, emergency protocols, staff on standby. Michael Poggy had none of those things, and yet for years he operated openly thanks to lax enforcement, a lack of whistleblowers, and a legal system that often treats exotic animal ownership like a hobby instead of a public hazard. The lawsuit and the backlash. While Dwight lay in recovery undergoing skin grafts and reconstructive surgeries, his legal team filed a civil lawsuit against Poggy for negligence and emotional trauma. And the response from the public, pure outrage. $150 to get mauled by a leopard in someone's backyard. How is this even legal? Who let this man keep wild animals next to someone's swing set? Animal rights organizations demanded accountability. News outlets ran headline after headline. Man mauled by leopard in Florida, backyard zoo. Exotic pet laws under fire after brutal attack. Leopard experience turns to bloodbath. Even state lawmakers were forced to take a second look at Florida's exotic pet loopholes. But Poggy, when questioned, he didn't express guilt, didn't apologize, didn't even seem surprised. Instead, he defended himself. He claimed the interaction was consensual, that Dwight Turner had paid willingly, that it was just bad luck. Let that sink in. According to Poggy, putting someone in a cage with a predator was totally fine because they said yes. No warning about the animal's past. No waiver. No backup plan. Just a handshake and a hungry leopard. When news of Dwight Turner's mauling broke, the headlines were shocking but short-lived. Another Florida man story. Another bizarre wildlife incident. Another viral headline that fades by the weekend. But here's the thing. This wasn't a one-time freak accident. It wasn't random. And it definitely wasn't rare. What happened in that backyard in Davie, Florida, wasn't just the result of one reckless man and one dangerous animal. It was the symptom of a much bigger problem, one hiding in plain sight across the United States. Welcome to America's underground jungle. In suburban backyards, tucked behind privacy fences, and hidden down dusty rural roads, there is a world most Americans have no idea exists. It's called the backyard zoo industry, and it's booming. Estimates suggest that over 10,000 big cats, tigers, lions, leopards, cougars are being kept in private hands across the U.S. For context, that's more than the number of tigers left in the wild worldwide. Let that sink in. And the scariest part, most of these animals aren't in licensed zoos. They're in sheds, barns, garages, and yes, residential backyards often owned by regular people with no formal training, no vet staff, and no legal oversight. How is this even legal? Great question. The answer, loopholes. Lots of them. Federal laws like the Endangered Species Act and the Animal Welfare Act are often too vague, too weak, or too outdated to address exotic pet ownership at the state level. So it's left up to each state to decide what's allowed, and many states drop the ball. Some states like California and New York have strict bans on private big cat ownership. Others like Florida and Texas allow it with permits or barely regulate it at all. In some rural counties, all you need is a fence, a lock, and a few $100. And just like that, your backyard becomes a private zoo, from side hustle to bloodshed. In the age of social media, owning exotic animals has become more than a passion. It's a business model. People like Michael Pogge aren't calling themselves zookeepers or breeders. They brand themselves as sanctuaries rescues or wildlife experiences. They post flashy content online. They advertise once-in-a-lifetime encounters. They charge admission sometimes in cash, sometimes through Venmo or PayPal. And thrill seekers line up. For $50, you can feed a tiger. For $100, you can hold a baby monkey. For $150, you can sit in a cage with a leopard. Until someone gets hurt. Then suddenly it's an unfortunate accident. The price people pay. Dwight Turner isn't the first person to pay for a wild encounter and leave with lifelong trauma. In 2011, in Zanesville, Ohio, a man released 50 exotic animals into the streets before taking his own life. Lions, bears, and tigers were shot by law enforcement in a desperate effort to protect the public. In 2020, a Texas man was caught walking a fully grown tiger through a Houston neighborhood on a leash. And let's not forget the Netflix phenomenon Tiger King, which gave the world a peek into just how unregulated and chaotic this underground world really is. These aren't isolated stories. They're a pattern. The wild doesn't belong in a cage next to your grill. Animals like leopards aren't meant to be backyard attractions. They aren't spiritual symbols. They aren't selfie props. They are apex predators with instincts that can't be trained out or loved away. And the moment you put one in a cage and sell access to it like it's a petting zoo, you're not just endangering yourself. You're putting everyone in that neighborhood at risk. Your mail carrier, the kids next door, the random person walking their dog past your fence. And when something goes wrong, it goes really wrong. In most survival stories, there's a moment of relief. The danger passes. The wounds heal. The hero stands back up. But for Dwight Turner, that moment never came. Yes, he survived. He walked out of the hospital weeks after a black leopard nearly ripped his scalp off in a backyard zoo just outside Fort Lauderdale. But he didn't walk out the same man who walked in. The physical toll. Let's start with the obvious. Dwight's injuries weren't just deep, they were devastating. Surgeons had to reattach his scalp using 22 surgical staples. He went through multiple rounds of skin grafts to cover the exposed muscle and bone. His right ear permanently disfigured, and parts of his face and skull still completely numb. He couldn't smile the same way. He couldn't feel the breeze on the side of his head. He had trouble sleeping, chewing, even blinking evenly at times. But the deeper damage wasn't physical. The trauma that doesn't heal. Friends and family say Dwight changed after the attack, not just in appearance, but in spirit. Before the mauling, he was peaceful, kind. He believed in energy and healing, in harmony between people and nature. He used to say that being near animals made him feel grounded, connected. Now, he flinched when a dog barked. He couldn't go near house pets. He avoided mirrors. Some days, he barely spoke. And worst of all, he blamed himself. He had walked into that cage voluntarily, trusting Michael Pogge, trusting that this so-called sanctuary had done its homework, had put safety first, had cared about the animals and the people. He didn't know he was stepping into a trap disguised as an experience. The lawsuit. A few months into his recovery, Dwight filed a civil lawsuit against Michael Pogge. The charges were straightforward: negligence, emotional distress, failure to disclose the risks, violation of wildlife regulations. The legal claim painted a damning picture. No waiver was signed. No safety precautions were in place. No trained personnel were present. And no warnings were given about the leopard's behavior, confinement conditions, or potential aggression. Poggy's defense: that Dwight knew the risks, that he entered the cage willingly, that it was just one of those things. But in the eyes of animal behavior experts, there's no such thing as a safe, close contact encounter with a leopard in captivity, especially not when the person running the show has no qualifications and no license. The system's failure. You'd think after such a high-profile attack, Florida's legal system would come down hard. But it didn't. Yes, Michael Poggy was charged with violating wildlife laws specifically for allowing public contact with a Class 1 animal without a license. Yes, his animals were seized. His operation was shut down. The black leopard was removed from the property. But fines were minimal. Jail time, 0. Poggy walked free. Just another name in a broken system full of loopholes. And Dwight? He walked away with scars. Not just the kind that show up on MRI scans or medical bills. The kind that follow you into your dreams. The kind that make silence feel unsafe. The kind that make you doubt your own judgment. One friend described it this way: he just wanted to meet a beautiful animal. He left with a torn scalp and nightmares. Another said Dwight no longer smiles in photos, that the light in his eyes has dimmed, that the man who once believed in peace now jumps at every shadow. This should never have happened. The truth is, everything that led to this attack was preventable. If laws had been enforced, if permits were taken seriously, if animal welfare was prioritized over profit, if anyone had stepped in before Poggy opened that cage, then maybe Dwight Turner would still have his smile. Maybe his nights would still be quiet. Maybe he wouldn't have to live every day remembering the sound of his own skin being torn off his skull. Dwight Turner survived, but his life will never be the same. And while the news cycle has moved on and the headlines have faded, the truth behind what happened in that Florida backyard still hangs heavy for Dwight and for the rest of us. Because this wasn't just about one man and one leopard. This was a wake-up call. And the question now is, did anyone actually wake up? A system built on silence. Let's be honest, most people don't think twice about what's behind the fences of their neighbor's yard. A dog? Sure. A few chickens? Maybe. But a leopard? A tiger? A bear? It sounds like fiction until someone ends up in the ICU barely holding on to their scalp, their identity, and their life. Across the United States, thousands of dangerous exotic animals are still being kept in private homes, barns, basements, and backyards. Some are hidden in plain sight. Others are marketed as sanctuaries or rescues. And regular people, are still paying for access, still stepping into cages, still trusting that someone somewhere has made it safe. But what Dwight's story makes crystal clear is this: they haven't. What's changed since the attack? Honestly, not much. Michael Poggy's backyard zoo is gone. His animals were seized. He was fined, but he's still walking free. And nothing in Florida law or federal law guarantees this can't happen again. There's been no sweeping reform, no crackdown on backyard zoos, no nationwide database tracking exotic animal ownership, which means the next Dwight Turner is already out there. He just hasn't bought his ticket yet. So let me ask you something. Would you let your child trick-or-treat in a neighborhood where someone keeps a leopard behind a fence? Would you walk your dog down a street where a tiger lives next door? Would you trust someone who charges $150 for a spiritual experience in a cage with no license, no vet, and no exit plan? Because that's not a horror movie setup. That's real life. That's happening right now. And the only reason it doesn't make headlines every day is because most people still don't know it's going on. Why do we keep playing with fire? America has an obsession with the wild. We love the idea of it exotic, dangerous, untamed. But we want it in a cage, tamed, controlled, available for selfies and TikToks. We forget that wild means wild, and wild can't be domesticated just because we paid an entrance fee. Dwight Turner thought he was stepping into a peaceful moment with nature. He walked away with his body mutilated, his trust shattered, and his soul changed. All because one man opened a cage, and no one stopped him. The cage is still there. That cage in Davie, Florida, is empty now, rusting, silent. The black leopard is gone. The show is over. But that's just one cage. There are hundreds more across the country, maybe thousands. Somewhere right now, another person is scrolling through Facebook, seeing an ad, meet a leopard up close. Pet a tiger. Once-in-a-lifetime wildlife experience, and maybe they'll believe it's safe. Maybe they'll think it's magical. Maybe they'll smile for the camera. Until the wild reminds them what it really is. So what now? That's the question we leave with you. Should this be legal? Should anyone be able to keep wild predators in residential neighborhoods? What will it take for lawmakers to finally say, enough is enough? And here's the hardest one. If Dwight Turner had died that day, would anything have changed at all? This wasn't just a story. It's a warning. Because once a cage is opened, once the line between man and beast is blurred, once profit matters more than protection, there's no way to guarantee who walks out alive. If you believe wild animals belong in the wild, not in backyards, then share this story. Talk about it. Demand better laws. And don't forget to subscribe to Animal Story for more true stories the world tried to forget, but we refuse to let disappear. Because next time, someone won't be so lucky.